All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. Again, my name is Alex, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. And what we're going to be going over here today is how to set up a chart of accounts in Aplos Accounting. For those of you who have been to our website, you're probably somewhat familiar with who we are and what we offer, but for those of you who are not, we are an online company that offers products to nonprofit organizations, and kind of our flagship product here is Aplos Accounting. So we provide fund accounting software for churches and nonprofits, typically in the small to medium range, but any organizations of any size can use us. So when you get started with an accounting software, really part of any accounting software, there's three main functions that you're going to do. The first is to kind of lay your foundation through creating a chart of accounts. We're going to get into that in just a second here today. So the first step is creating a chart of accounts. Once you have a chart of accounts figured out and created in an accounting software, you can then use those accounts that you created when recording transactions. And that's what you do 90% of the time using an accounting software. So you create your accounts, you use them in transactions, and then you can do the third thing, which is pull reports. And that is any accounting software boiled down to three basic steps. So today, we're going to take a look at that first step, laying that foundation, which is creating a chart of accounts. So when you register for Aplos Accounting, you're going to walk through a very quick tutorial that kind of acclimates you to the software and walks you through a couple of different things that you can do. But then once you're done with that, you're going to land here, which is your dashboard. And on the left-hand side, you have access to the other areas of the product. When you click on Accounting and go to Accounts, you are landed here, which is your account list screen. Now on this screen is where you can create your funds, and you can create the different types of accounts that you're going to use in Aplos when recording transactions and keeping up with the financial data of your organization. So very quickly, I want to go through the different types of accounts and what they mean, and kind of what types of accounts you would create for each section. Okay, so in accounting, there's 5 different types of accounts. Okay, the first one is called asset accounts, and that's the first little section right here. An asset account is an account that you set up to track the balance of anything that your organization owns. Okay, it's yours. So at the most basic level, this is an account to represent, the money in your checking account or savings account or a petty cash, balance that you carry. Other types of assets can be accounts receivable, so money that is owed to you but you haven't received yet. You can also have fixed assets for items like furniture or equipment or inventory or building or land. Anything, again, that you own is considered an asset, and so you would want to create an account for that. Okay, so there's your asset account. The second type of account is a liability account, otherwise known as some sort of debt. Okay, so this is money that you owe, but you haven't paid yet. So it's money that you owe, haven't paid yet. Liability. So you would create an account to represent any balance that you owe someone else, something like accounts payable. So if someone invoices you and says, I did some work on your property, and so then you owe me $100, you can create an accounts payable or an AP for that. You can also create a liability account for your credit cards, because that's money that you're purchasing on credit. You haven't really paid the balance yet, so it's just kind of this building, accumulated balance. So that would be a liability as well. This can also be longer term debt like land or building mortgages, accrued interest, all that kind of debt that you would have to pay out to someone else. So that's the second type of account that you can create there. I'm going to skip past equity for just a second and move on to income. So income is, now income and expenses are typically the types of accounts that you're going to use on a more daily basis, because the income accounts are the ways that you receive money. So when you say, when someone hands you $100 for whatever reason, that whatever reason is probably going to be an income account that you create. So is this a contribution? Is this a grant? Is this money to a specific fund or program that you're doing, like a fundraiser or missions income? Is this revenue from book sales or CD sales? Any reason why you're receiving that money, you would create an income account for that purpose. Okay, so there's income, and then expenses is the exact opposite. It's any way or any reason that you guys are spending money. Now, expenses are probably going to be the most lengthy section of your account structure. because you spend money in a lot of different ways. So all of your expenses here: salary and wages, office cleaning, office supplies, rent, dues and subscriptions, fees, local outreach, postage, missions expenses, any reason you're spending money, you're going to create an expense account for that. So then when you record a transaction, you'd pick, I spent $50 at Best Buy, and that was for my office supplies expense account. And there you go. Now, moving back to equity. Now, equity is a little bit different for churches and nonprofits because you guys do what's called fund accounting, which is what we specialize in. So in a business standpoint, equity means retained earnings. So throughout the year, you record, I had this much income and I had this much expense, which I had, maybe $200 profit over the year. So that at the end of the year rolls into what's called retained earnings. And that's kind of the overall balance at the end of the day of how much money you have on hand. Now with funds, it's a little bit different. So with funds, a nonprofit or a church, you guys need to split out everything into different funds. And a fund is something that has its own income, it's got its own expense, but it's also potentially got its own assets, its own liabilities, and at the end of the day, it's got its own overall value or equity, okay? So it's almost like it's a little mini organization within your larger total. So let's run through an example. So let's say in my checking account, I've got $1,000, okay? So I've got $1,000 in my checking account, but I want to know how much of that $1,000 is set aside for my general fund, my missions fund, and my building fund. Well, with fund accounting, you can know that. You would create those three funds or more, and then each one of those funds, as you record transactions, you would record, there's this income or this expense, and then also it's either adding to or taking away from this fund. So you pick a fund. So your fund balance is updated as you go with every transaction you enter. So for your funds, what you're going to do is up here in the top, you'd create your funds here. Now, typically what I tell people is when you're thinking of what would be a fund, ask yourself the question, do I need to know how much I have set aside for blank? The answer to that blank is most likely going to be a fund that you want to create in Aplos. Now, that differs, and you might have some questions on that. So if you do, feel free to let us know. We'd be happy to clarify. But as kind of a rule of thumb, that usually categorizes a fund. So create a fund here. That will add it to this fund box right there. It will also add an equity account in the equity section here. So you actually don't need to do anything in this section. So there's your funds. Now for these other areas, for assets, liabilities, income, and expense, as you're thinking through these types of accounts, when you're ready to create an account, you can go in here and you can click this little black plus button here, and that will add an account to this kind of grouping. You can see that it's, it looks a little bit different than the other things. That is an account group that you have created there. So you can create an account in an account group. You can also create different account groups. So if you wanted to do that, just at the bottom of whatever section you're in, click the plus add group here, and then you can add a new account group. And that's just another way that you can categorize your accounts. So let's see, like income. So income, I've got an account group for just kind of in general income, and then I've got special projects income. So on your reports, you can see the total for each one of your income accounts, and then also subtotaled by these groups that you have set up. Okay. So again, add a group or add an account to a group, and that's how you manage your chart of accounts. Now, a couple of other things that I wanted to mention in this accounts section is we have these screens up here at the top. Budgeting you can turn on from the advanced settings here, but budgeting basically allows you to set a budget value, a projected expected value for your income and your expense accounts for the current year and the upcoming couple of years. You can choose that. So you would say, this year for this income account, we expect to receive $12,000. For this income account, we expect to receive $5,000. So you'd go down the line, enter all of your projected income, same thing with all of your expenses, and then down here at the bottom, just click update, and that will then save the budget. So the next time you go to the budgeting screen, you've got some data there, and then now on your reports, you can run what's called budget to actual income statement, which shows the totals of your income and expenses that you've been recording through transactions and how that compares to your budget or your projection for the year. Also, another thing we have here is starting balances. Starting balances, if you're new to Aplos, if this is the first thing that you're doing here, setting up your chart of accounts, the next thing you're going to need to do is figure out when you're starting Aplos as of. So is this as of today, November 5th? Are you going to start recording transactions from today on forward? Or are you going to backtrack a little bit and say, as of the beginning of November or even the beginning of the year, I want to record all the transactions from there on out? What you would do is in your mind, pick that day, whatever that day is. So January 1, November 1, June 1, whatever you want, pick that day. And then what you're going to want to do is find out the balances of all of your assets and liabilities as of that day. So let's take January 1 for an example. Let's say January 1 is going to be my start date. I'm going to find my balances as of that day. So how much money did I have in my checking account January 1? What about savings? How much money did I have January 1? How much money did I owe my credit card or my loan or my accounts payable? How much debt did I have as of January 1? So I would go through there, I'd find those balances, and then what you're going to do is you're going to parse those out per fund. So here I've got an example, $20,000 beginning balance for my checking account. So let's say that the total balance of my checking was $20,000, and I'm saying that out of that $20,000, I want 5 set aside for building, I want 5 set aside for missions, and I want 10 set aside for general. So pick the day, find the balances, divvy the balances throughout your funds, and then click update. Now what that will do is it's going to post a transaction that includes those balances as of that first day. So then what you would do is now start recording transactions in this transaction section here, which we're going to cover next week in another webinar, to where then you would use these accounts that you've now created to show all of the income, all of the expenses, which will either add to or take away from that starting balance all the way up until today, and then going forward in your account. One last thing I want to mention here is tags. So in tags, you've got a couple of different options. You can create and manage 1099 tags. So if you wanted to track how much money you've been paying your non-employee vendors and need to track them for 1099s at the end of the year, you can enable those. You can also enable custom tags. A custom tag is like a project that you do. So it's not an account and it's not a fund. It really doesn't carry any sort of value. It's just something else that you want to track. So an example that we typically use here is like a fundraiser for your building fund. So let's say you're throwing a fundraiser. All of the proceeds, all of the money is going to actually go into your building fund, but you want to track how profitable that particular event or thing project was. So you'd create a custom tag for that. And then when you enter transactions, you would then pick a custom tag along with income and fund. And then that would allow you to run an income statement on that custom tag. Okay, so it's there if you need it. And then 990 tags, if you guys are a larger organization that needs to file the full form 990 return for nonprofits at the end of the year, or whenever you're required to based on your fiscal year, you can enable these 990 tags here, which would then allow you to pick the applicable 990 category when entering transactions so that you can run a 990 income statement, which would help you fill out that 990 return at the end of the year. Okay, so that is creating a chart of accounts in Aplos. Again, this is kind of the first thing that you want to do when getting set up with a new account, because it really is the foundation of everything else that you're going to do from there on forward. So you would create a chart of accounts, think through your income and your expenses and your funds, assets and debt, create all of those accounts, group them however you want. Once that structure is created, then you can then use those accounts in transactions, which is the daily occurrences, the spending and receiving of money that happens leading up to today, to then you can pull reports, which is kind of, again, in summary, any accounting software that you decide to use. Okay. One last thing that I wanted to show you is on the dashboard here, all of our support is free, so feel free to reach out to us if you ever have a question or want some help or training getting set up. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you can click this little question mark, and that brings up a conversation that you can start with us. As we're available, we'll be able to respond to you. But on your dashboard, we also have this support resources link. If you click that, there's some video tutorials here, so you can watch what today's subject was, as well as some other stuff here. You can also go through some of our video courses, and that's actually what I wanted to show you there. This first one here, Intro to Nonprofit Accounting, is a free course that we've created that walks you through the basics of nonprofit accounting. So there's me. So this is lesson 1. When you click on that link, you're going to be brought here. And this goes through, it's non-Applos specific, so we don't look at the software like we did here today. But what it does is it goes through in detail what is accounting, what are those 5 different things, assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. It's got a lot of text and lots of examples and graphics and stuff that you can use to understand it. So anyway, if you're kind of new to accounting or just need a brush up, feel free to go through that course. It's free. And then actually, if you go back to the main course, there's a lot of other lessons that you can go through as well. So the basics is what is accounting. And then if you want to know a little bit more about what fund accounting means and how that differs from normal business accounting, you go through that course as well. And then we have a nonprofit chart of accounts. What is a general ledger or transactions? What are the reports you need to generate? So on and so forth. So feel free to go through that if you'd like. Otherwise, if you have a question, feel free to reach out. All right. Well, thanks for showing up today. That was a lot of information. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for some Q&A time. So if you have any questions, feel free to use that question field in your GoToWebinar control panel, and then I'll be back in just a minute or two to answer those for you. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, feel free to use those little question marks or email support@applos.com.